Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pascal Schubach. I'm the chair of the Digital Engagement Committee for IAEM, and wanted to invite you and welcome you to today's Cybersecurity 101 webinar with Sarah Miller and the Understanding the Basics of Threats and Preventions, an important thing for us to think about. We're just about ready to get started. We have a couple housekeeping items that, excuse me, wanted to make sure that everyone understands and knows. We're going to be using the chat feature and the questions the question sections to be able to answer your questions, so that we can give Sarah the time to go all the way through her presentation, and then she will dedicate time and focus to your questions afterwards. And we will make sure that that is done, and we'll put the questions in order. I can then reduce the questions in case there's some duplicates as well. And as well, this recording will be posted on the IAM website shortly after the webinar. Chelsea will be taking care of that. And if you have any audio issues or other issues, please just put in the chat session, and we'll try and take care of those things as soon as possible and let you know back in the chat session too how we're doing that. Once again, welcome to the Cybersecurity 101 webinar. I'd like to introduce our host, or our speaker today. She's a very good friend of mine. She's a great colleague as well. Sarah Miller is a certified emergency manager and is the chair of the IAEM Emerging Technology Caucus, and she's a certified cybersecurity manager. She's currently the EM coordinator for 16 cities of the South King County, Washington area. She serves as the vice president of IAEM for Region 10, which is the Great Pacific Northwest. She is also an adjunct faculty member at several colleges and universities and moonlights as a cybersecurity trainer. Yes, she moonlights it, although it seems like she does this full time. It is fun, it is definitely needed, and she's also an adjunct instructor back at EMI and has taught in all three levels of the basic, advanced, and executive academies. She is a lifelong nerd, I can attest for that. And Sarah has been involved in public safety technology projects for over 20 years, and I consider her a very great friend. And Sarah, I will pass it off to you.
Thanks, Pascal. Now let's see if I can make sure this goes to the right screen. Well, hey everybody, thanks for coming today. I know there's a bunch of people who really want to learn about this topic, and so we're going to go through a very basic understanding of threats and preventions. This is not a session for your technology people necessarily, though they might get something out of it from the emergency management side. It is a session for emergency managers. So I'm going to keep it at that level. So we're going to do a little bit of a review of some recent incidents. We're going to do a basic overview of what we're even talking about. Look at the basic threat landscape, incident life cycle, some basic prevention stuff that everybody should be doing. And then we're going to take a look at a response and recovery policy template. I do have some interactive pieces through here. So if you've got your smartphone, well, this even works with stupid phones. So if you have a cell phone of some kind or access to a web browser, we're going to do some interactive pieces, and that starts right here. So this is just a free text thing, but what I'd like to know is what cybersecurity incidents you have already heard about that have occurred this year. And there's a link there, or you can use the text option. And if you text to 37607, the code SMILLER 589, you'll join and you'll be able to text your responses. So the goal of this is just to kind of see what you already know about and give everybody a general idea of what the threat landscape looks like right now. This is obviously a growing problem, and we see a lot of activity in this realm that not everybody necessarily looks at as being dangerous or applicable to them. So I'm going to give this just a second while people start putting stuff in there. Obviously, Atlanta, that was a huge one. And if you don't know what that is, we're actually going to talk about it in a minute. So I'm going to be silent for just a moment while people are doing it. There we go. And thank you for participating, because this makes it more interesting. Oh, look, and the more people who put in the same words, the larger something gets in this word cloud. So Clearly, there's agreement that Facebook and Atlanta were large incidents. And you see some common themes emerging in this, and probably things you've heard of, and maybe a few that you have not. I'm a big fan of these real-time things. So I'm going to give this another 10 seconds or so for you to press enter and for it to populate so that we can move on with the rest, because there's some great stuff on there. Clearly, Facebook is the winner, or in this case, the big loser, I would say. And Atlanta's coming in a close second. All right, so thank you for participating in that. Keep your phones and stuff out because we're going to do a couple of more of those. So this is just sort of an overview of some of the larger incidents that have happened this year already. Cambridge Analytica and Facebook had their big debacle. A lot of people had information released in that should not have been. If you're not familiar with it, Cambridge Analytica was a research firm that they created an app on Facebook that what I call one of the silly surveys. They encourage you to participate in this survey. You clicked and said yes, you would give them access to some of your information. Unfortunately, they took all that information. They also took information from people you were friends with on Facebook. I got a notice from Facebook letting me know that my information had been breached in this, not because I used the app, but because someone in my friends list did. A lot of you've probably seen the very large incident that happened with the city of Atlanta. That was a malware infection that inserted ransomware onto their systems, shut them all down for an extended period of time. They spent somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million to recover their systems to the point that they would work. But there's some data lost forever because you can't get it back. And I know somebody's thinking, well, why didn't they just pay the ransom? We don't pay ransom a lot of times in government because A, we don't want to fund criminal enterprise, and B, even if you pay the ransom, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the codes to release your data. And so they went to backups and things, but they lost tons of productivity. They lost data. People weren't able to do simple things like pay their water bills because literally someone either clicked a link they shouldn't have or inserted something into their computer that they shouldn't have. Macy's had a big data breach. The Chili's, you'll see the Chili's logo. Chili's had a credit card data breach. Twitter had a breach, well, they had a potential breach of data. They discovered that one of their servers was holding all of our usernames and passwords in clear text, meaning anyone with access to that server could read any of our usernames and passwords. And so that was a big oops. And then Metro Public Health in Nashville had a data release as well of confidential information. The list goes on and on and on, but these are some big ones that a lot of you've probably heard of. So this is a real-time map. So this is pulling real-time data, and I like this just to show the scope of the problem. So this started running as soon as I opened the presentation. So it's been gathering information here for 10 or 15 minutes, but this is showing a real-time map of cyber attacks that are going on globally, and you can see where they're going to and from. And it's telling you where they're going to and from, what kind of attacks they are. But the point of this is not those things. The point of this is to show you the magnitude of this threat. This is the Kaspersky Labs threat detector, and it just constantly runs and is showing real-time data that they are detecting using their systems and other monitoring devices. The threat is gigantic and never ever stops. You can see spots on the map where there's huge hubs of activity and where it's going to and from. And of course, in the United States, we're constantly being barraged by stuff. So this is just to give you an idea of sort of the extent of what we're talking about and the fact that it is going on all around us all of the time. And my presentation has frozen for some reason. So I'll just do a little ad lib here while I jump to the next one. Sorry about that. So here's our next poll, and this is an easy one. This is a yes or no question. And has your organization experienced any type of cybersecurity incident? Some of you are very quick on that. You must be using the web app. I'm going to give this a little bit of time, but a cybersecurity incident really is anything that you might consider to be some sort of security incident related to your systems. It might be malware, it might be unauthorized access. The numbers on this are staggering. And what I found in asking this question, especially asking it anonymously like this, is that a large number of incidents are never reported through any official channels. So there's 75% of you on this call now have said, yes, you've had some sort of an incident. That is a significant number. And odds are most of those incidents never were elevated to any sort of official reporting. They just exist out there. You dealt with them. Sometimes they're kept quiet on purpose because somebody doesn't want to get fired. Sometimes they're not recognized for what they are until after the fact. And it's a huge number. And I do this poll to sort of emphasize that this doesn't happen to other people. This happens to us. And it happens to all of us. Cybersecurity is everybody's problem. A lot of times people are like, oh, it's the IT department's problem. We'll let them take care of it, but it really isn't. It is partially their problem. It's also partially an emergency management issue. It's partially a law enforcement issue. And at its core, just like preparedness, it is the responsibility of every single person in your organization. And if they are not in tune with that, you're going to have incidents, you're going to have more incidents, and you're not going to be able to stop it. And they are, until everyone accepts that, yeah, they have some role in this, you're not going to be able to put an end to any of these issues. Most, and I say it's everyone's role because most incidents are due to human error. Someone clicked something they shouldn't have, someone inserted a thumb drive they shouldn't have, someone didn't install security patches or software patches that they should have. It's human error. A lot of it comes down to phishing and social engineering, which is made easier by agency and employee use of social media. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Phishing is a huge, huge issue, and I've got some examples we'll look at. And then the other piece of the human factor is careless information access or dissemination. So people not paying attention in public spaces, people using public Wi-Fi, people not locking their computers, and just generally a lack of awareness and caution when they're accessing data and information. So this is sort of the government-centric threat. So if you're not government, I apologize, but these are all from this year, earlier this year. As of April, finally, every state has a law requiring data breach notification. Baltimore's 911 system had a cyber attack. City of Loganville, which I don't remember where that is now, they had a data breach that they had to share with people. Laptops stolen, and then the Atlanta incident. It is not avoiding government. We are not immune from this. So the most common threats for end users, and this is really what we're going to focus on because typically as emergency managers, you're not responsible for back-end stuff, that we're going to talk about it briefly. So the most common end user threats are phishing, malware, including ransomware, social engineering or vishing, and vishing is the new term for voice phishing. So someone calling on the phone and trying to get information from you. Social media threats. One of the biggest ones is credential reuse and poor password management, meaning that people are using their logins or similar logins for multiple places. And then one that often gets overlooked is unauthorized physical access. A lot of these things could not happen if there wasn't unauthorized physical access to a location. And then the most common system level threats. Unpatched software is the big one. The WannaCry virus really capitalized on unpatched software. And there's reasons that patches don't get done sometimes, but the reality is when patches are released, it's often for security reasons. And I can't even tell you how many times people have said, oh, I never install the software updates on my phone because I don't trust them, which means that most of those phones are subject to compromise because They don't have the latest threat or patches on them, which would protect them. So you've got SQL or SQL injection attacks. These happen on websites that contain databases, and lots of websites contain databases now, but it inserts malicious code to try and grab information from the database that isn't supposed to be there. Then you've got cross-site scripting, where malicious scripts are put onto websites. Some of them are meant to install on your computer and run things on your computer. Some of them are meant to simply exploit what's already there. One of the most common ones that's happening now, which may or may not be classified as malicious, but websites are embedding code on their site that when you open up their website, it starts running this code and it's using your computer to mine Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency for whoever the website owner is. And there's no way for the end user typically to know that that's happening unless they're paying attention. Then you've got denial of service or distributed denial of service attacks. Usually when you see that someone's website has gone down, it's because of a denial of service attack. And the best description I've seen of this is a really busy freeway. On a normal day, traffic starts flowing, it's just fine, but then you push so many cars there for some reason and no traffic can get through. And it's the exact same thing with a denial of service attack. So much traffic is pointed at a website that it just can't survive. Amazon Prime did this by accident on Prime Day on Tuesday. No one could buy things from Amazon on Prime Day. That was probably not malicious, it was an accident. Malicious denial of services, though, happen when someone aims a botnet or some other barrage of computers at a site with the intent of taking it down. And sometimes it's our government sites. And then you have session hijacking or man-in-the-middle attacks, where essentially some device pretends to be something it's not. So you may connect to public Wi-Fi, for instance, and what you're actually connecting to is someone who set up a Wi-Fi hotspot to mimic the public Wi-Fi that you were trying to connect to. So we're not going to talk about these system level threats except to say that they're there. These are the things that your IT departments are working on. And it's some of the things that as an end user, you can prevent yourself from being subject to just by following basic security protocol. So the outcome of all this bad stuff, you can accidentally release protected information. You can, there can be unauthorized control of systems. For instance, someone could log into your water distribution system and do things to your water. There's unauthorized access to information. So people get in, they don't release it, but they get in and they poke around and they read what they want to read, or maybe even change things that were in your system. There's loss of data where people can just delete things that were there. Loss of productivity. When your systems are down, your employees are still coming to work, but they can't do anything. There's system shutdowns where unauthorized access can shut down your system. There's actual financial theft where someone can log in and take your money. There will be lawsuits should any of these things happen generally. And in the worst case for us, somebody gets hurt or killed. And we don't want to do that. The rest we can kind of deal with in some way, but if somebody gets hurt or killed because we had poor security and privacy practices, that's horrible, and we don't want that to happen. So you all recognize this, our lovely life cycle: prevention, protection, mitigation, response, and recovery. The exact same life cycle applies to cybersecurity. So in prevention, we're going to talk about some of these things, but there's some stuff that you have to have. You have to have an emergency operations plan. If you have computers or other technology, you have to have a cybersecurity policy. It might be simple, but you have to have one. And you have to have an acceptable use policy. You have to have something that instructs your employees on what is acceptable to do with your technology and what is not. And it needs to outline punishments if those things aren't followed. So you need to take stock of what you've done to prepare, what policies you have, what training you have on those policies, and how the policies are enforced. As often as not, there's a policy on the books, but it's never enforced, which means in practice, it's not actually a policy. It was the good idea fairy. So this is a phishing example. So phishing is when you get an email that looks legitimate, but it's trying to extract information from you. I just got this one that's on the left earlier this week. That's actually a screenshot from my phone. And poor Scott, he's actually someone I work with. He's someone I know. And it struck me as odd. And so when I looked through this, I realized that, of course, that's not his actual email address. And he doesn't owe me any money. But the really interesting thing about this one to me is that it combines 2 different accounts plus a third from someone I know. So what this tells me is that someone I know has an email compromise on their system, because this has the name of my private company. It's got my email address from my government account, and it came from a name with a forged email address of someone I work with at one of the cities I serve. So someone in my network has a compromised system, and this is a pretty obvious outcome of that. I did not click the link because my assumption is it's malware or phishing, and I wasn't going to give them that. But it was a fascinating example to me in near real time that someone's been compromised and doesn't know it yet. But phishing is a real problem. It's one of the biggest problems there is, because people who are phishing are trying to get your username and password for your systems. If they have your username and password, it's extremely easy for them to just log in and pretend to be you. And it's almost impossible for your IT department to monitor that because it looks like you. One of my private sector clients who did a phishing test, 10% of their staff clicked on the link in the phishing email and entered their real credentials into a fake website that was made to look kind of like theirs. That is a significant number. And had it been a real attack, all of their entire systems would have been compromised because all it takes is one person to be able to log in. So phishing requires training. It requires practice. It requires that someone log in and ensure that everybody in the system is supposed to be there. This is one of the primary reasons that we enforce password management and password changes, is because eventually if you're compromised, those passwords will change and you won't be able to use them anymore. So malware is our next big threat. Malware it's just malicious software. It's software that's trying to do something bad to your computer or your networks. And it usually happens because you get something that says, click here, and you don't look to see what the link is, and you click, and you install something evil on your computer. Or you go to a website. The one on the left is an example from a website. So you went to a website and it popped this thing up because the website itself had malicious code in it, and it's actually trying to get you to click to install malicious software on your computer. It's not actually there to help. And then the other way that malware gets installed is people randomly insert USB drives into computers. And this is a thing that happens in conferences. You go to conferences or classes and they give you the material on a thumb drive, you plug it into your machine, and there was an executable on there that you didn't know, and you might still not know. It might just be roaming free on your network and doing things without your permission, and there's nothing you can do about it at that point. So this is a policy level thing where you decide, are you going to have USB slots open on your computers? And if so, what is your policy for what you can plug into them and who can plug into them? So that's a conversation to have with IT, but it's a very, very important conversation because that is a primary way that malware gets inserted. One of my clients dropped random thumb drives around their company. They dropped 20 of them. Most of them got returned. Most people were like, oh yeah, I remember I'm not supposed to plug in thumb drives. 4 of them got plugged in, 3 at the company itself. And they know this because it had a non-malicious piece of code that just said it had been plugged in and where. And one of them somebody took home and plugged in, and thus exposing their own personal information potentially to it. So malware is a huge issue. There's a lot of things we can do for protection. One of them is having good access policies. So having badges or something that allow people to swipe themselves in and only themselves in. Having firewalls that are installed and updated regularly. Having antivirus software that is run. Having two-factor authentication, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. And having virtual private network. And all of these things in concert with each other help protect you from malicious attacks. And it's just as important for you to be doing this on your personal devices as it is on your work-related devices, because at some point the lines blur and people can use information that they find about you personally to execute attacks on your organization. And so doing this on your personal devices is just as important as it is in doing it on your work devices. So we've got a lot of software-based tools. Every Windows computer comes with virus protection installed on it now. It's called Windows Defender, and it is perfectly acceptable to use. Different companies like different software, but if you don't want to buy new, you can use Windows Defender, which ships with Windows 10, and it works just fine as long as you let it update regularly. There's a lot of ways to do malware detection. It's not hard to get malware on a computer if you're not running virus protection. And malware detection can be done online. It can also be done with software. There's a lot of different things to do that with, but it's important that you are checking and that you do check to make sure you don't have any. Firewalls are critical. This is an IT-based thing typically, except on your personal computers at home, but firewalls disallow access to certain portions of your network and certain routes into your network. And then there's a really great website called virustotal.com, and you can input other websites into it or other files into it, and it will tell you if they're malicious. And just as a side note, there will be a link at the end of this where you can download the entire presentation and have direct access to all of the links. So software-based prevention is critical to any computer that you own or run for work purposes. Probably the most important thing that people can do is password management. And we collectively are really bad about password management. Most people are not doing good password management. So the basic rule of thumb is you never reuse passwords, meaning you don't reuse an old one and you don't use the same one across multiple sites. And the new best practice is to use phrases instead of passwords. We used to say it's got to be at least 8 characters with uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, special characters, which isn't horrible, but the easier way to do it is with a phrase, because research has shown that longer is better. And there's all kinds of phrases you can use. It can be movie quotes or things that would only be known to you, but longer is better. And then a critical piece is using an encrypted password manager. And a lot of people don't do this. A lot of people are writing their passwords on sticky notes. They're putting them in notebooks. They've got them in an Excel spreadsheet. None of those are securing your passwords. Encrypted password managers are the solution to this issue, and they are well accepted in the corporate world. For whatever reason, it's harder to get them accepted into government, but that's not to stop you from using your own on your own device. But an encrypted password manager, essentially, you have an app on your phone, and it is a database with all of your usernames and passwords for everything that you do. And it will help you generate new passwords. And it stores it there, and it is encrypted. And you choose the key with which to encrypt and decrypt it. So that even if it's stolen, unless someone has your key, which is usually a passphrase, they cannot access your encrypted database of passwords. So typically it stores on the cloud. There are some really, really good ones, and this review at Wirecutter is a really good place to read about their recommendations. They talk you through their picks. They talk you through their methodology for them. Another great thing about encrypted password managers is it allows you to share passwords that you legitimately need to share without ever writing them down, because users can share passwords within the encrypted password management system. And it ties, they're typically cloud-based, but it's encrypted end to end. And I know somebody's thinking, what if it gets stolen or hacked? And I will tell you that the one that I use was hacked last year, but only I have the key, and that key is also tied to my device. So even if they somehow were managed to break my 25-character passphrase key, they would have to enter it from my device, which I still have in my hand. So there's multiple layers here that keep your password manager secure. And that's a great way to keep things secure. And it's a really important thing to do because we have massive numbers of passwords. Some of them have to be changed every 45 days, every 90 days. Some of them are 15 characters long. You cannot remember them. And so we write them down, and writing them down makes them insecure and subject to compromise. So here's the last poll we've got. And there's three possible answers. And the question is, do you use multi-factor or two-factor authentication on anything? A for yes, B for no, but I know what it is, and C for I don't know what you're talking about. See, this makes my heart happy watching all of these yeses. That's a large number. So that's good. A lot of places are forcing it, and we'll talk about it in just a minute. And I'm surprised that nobody said, I have no idea what you're talking about, because there's usually somebody who has no idea what I'm talking about. But that's okay. That's a good thing. So multi-factor authentication means that you do more than one thing to log into whatever account you're trying to get to. It's also sometimes called two-factor authentication, but it has a username and a password, and then it has another thing that you do. Typically, on most sites, it can be set up as a text. That is the least secure way to do it because text, it's really easy to spoof a phone if somebody really wants your stuff. The best way to do it is to use an authenticator app, which generates a secret code. So for instance, if I want to log into my Twitter account, I go to Twitter, I enter my username and my password, and then it says, enter your secret code. And so I grab my phone, which has the secret code generator, and I have it generate the secret code, and I put that in, and then Twitter logs in. It is available on a large number of sites. Login.gov now uses it, so most .gov, federal.gov websites require you to use it, though they don't use a particularly secure method. But there's other ways that it can be accessed, biometric scans, so typically a fingerprint or a CAC card that you would plug into your machine. It's usually also an ID badge. But multi-factor authentication is the single most important thing that you can do to secure whatever account you are using, whether it's a work account, a social media account, a personal account. Two-factor authentication means that nobody can log in except you, even if they have your username and password. So I encourage you to go set that up wherever possible. There's a website, twofactorauth.org, that's got a list of sites that support two-factor authentication and a list of sites that don't with their contact information. So if you discover that your favorite bank does not use it, it tells you exactly who to contact to encourage them to do so. And there are some pretty big banks that are not currently using it and should be, but more and more are forcing this because it's really a critical thing to ensure security. As a matter of fact, I believe now that if you have a Facebook page for your organization, all of the people who are listed as administrators have to have two-factor authentication turned on their Facebook account in order to be page administrators because they're recognizing how important it is. So physical access, this doesn't get talked about nearly enough, I think. When we're talking about physical access, we're talking, there's a lot of talk about tailgating or piggybacking, where someone has let someone into a building who didn't belong there, but looked like they did, or it's just following someone in who let themselves in and didn't check to see if they were being followed. This happens a lot. And part of the reason is we either don't have or don't enforce visible ID badge policies, and we really, really need to. I love this from the movie on the right, where this guy does not belong in the building, but he's made it so complicated and he really looks like he belongs there. They just let him in rather than fish through his pocket to get his ID badge. And then the other thing that happens a lot is unlocked computers, which are a huge problem in a lot of organizations. People don't lock their computer because they're just getting up for a minute. And in that minute, a lot can happen. And so having a visible ID badge policy is critical. Enforcing that ID badge policy is critical. Having a policy that says you don't let anybody else in the building, that everyone swipes in, is a good way to address this. And then encouraging everyone who works in your building or buildings to report things. It really comes down to see something, say something. But if people are encouraged to challenge people who don't belong there or report them to security or whoever they should be reported to, this problem can stop very, very quickly. The private sector does a lot of penetration testing, or pen testing as they call it, and it nearly always starts with someone trying to gain unauthorized access to a building, because that's usually their easiest way in. They don't even have to hack. They can just walk in a building and plug their computer into a port somewhere in the building and often not be challenged at all. And they can sit there and do whatever they want on the network because somebody let them in the building or they let themselves in. So a lot of times people are hesitant. They don't want to confront people. It's awkward. But if everyone knows it's okay, then everyone will start wearing their name badges because they get tired of being challenged for them. So find ways to incentivize this so that you're keeping your facilities secure. The other thing that happens a lot is public space issues. So we're not always as careful as we should be with either our personal devices or our issued devices in public spaces. We don't always check to see who's around us when we're accessing things on computers. People can be looking over our shoulder and we never ever know. Devices get left behind, and that happens a lot. And when that happens, you're probably not getting it back, and your very system may be compromised. My favorite or least favorite is free Wi-Fi. Free Wi-Fi is like the barroom scene from Return of the Jedi, and it's a cesspool, and anything can happen there, and you never know who might be on that free Wi-Fi. You never know if the free Wi-Fi itself may be spoofed and you're actually connecting to some guy's computer. But there's ways to protect yourself if you must use free Wi-Fi. If you absolutely have to use it, you have to use it with a VPN, a virtual private network. A VPN takes every piece of data that leaves your device, whether it's a phone or a computer, encrypts it, sends it across the network, and decrypts it on the other side, so that even if somebody can hijack it, they can't read it. It's just garbage to them. But to illustrate this point, free Wi-Fi it's any Wi-Fi that isn't yours that you connect to. So it's hotels, it's airports, it's just the grocery store, the doctor's office. All those free Wi-Fi hotspots are generally not super secure, and anybody can be on them. And my favorite example was when I was traveling a few months ago. I was in a hotel and I let my phone connect to the hotel Wi-Fi, knowing what the risks were. And my phone said, "Hey, we see your Chromecast. Do you wanna watch some YouTube videos?" Well, I didn't have my Chromecast, and I certainly hadn't connected it to a free Wi-Fi. However, someone else had. So of course I did the obvious thing, and I said, yes, I would love to watch YouTube videos on my Chromecast. And I just sent a series of cat videos from YouTube to this random Chromecast in the hotel for an extended period of time. Hopefully that person learned their lesson and quit connecting to the free Wi-Fi with their Chromecast. And then conversations on public spaces. We've probably all heard conversations in public spaces that we really wished we hadn't heard. People yelling at their kids, breaking up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, talking to their doctor, talking to their boss. Public space conversations are one of the easiest way that people learn information they're not supposed to learn. My favorite recent example of this, I was on a plane, and somebody 2 or 3 rows behind me was on his phone before we closed the boarding door, and he's ordering tractor parts. He gave his name, his address, his credit card information with the expiration date and 3-digit security code. Anyone who was paying attention, had a good memory, hit the record button on their phone, could have spent the entire trip shopping with that guy's credit card. And he would have probably been oblivious. Probably if that happened and his credit card company said, "Do you have any idea how this happened?" His answer would have been no, because it didn't occur to him that 40 people just got all his credit card information, because he just wasn't careful with it. And so it's important that we just be mindful of what's around us, who's around us, and where we're accessing information, and the safeguards we're taking to secure that. A lot of laptops now have a button that turns on a digital privacy screen. If there's no button, you can there's some film you can buy to put over the screen so people can't read it. But these are obvious ways and easy ways that people get access to our information that they shouldn't. And so we need to all be mindful of that and make sure the people around us are. I'm going to go into social media just a little bit because social media it's very useful for us in emergency management. We can do a lot of good with it. But if we and the people around us, meaning our employees, our employers, our friends, our family, aren't using it correctly, it can expose us as individuals and our organizations to a lot of bad things. So assume everything you post is public, regardless of what settings you have and everything you've done. Assume that every post you make is public, because even if you didn't intend for it to be, somebody can take a screen capture of it and do whatever they want with it. And I just saw very recently something really bad happen with that, where ultimately threats were made and the police had to be called, and someone shared that information and it got worse. And they thought they were sharing in confidence in a closed private group on Facebook, and someone in that group took a screen capture of it and shared it with the person in question. Don't share personal information. I know it makes social media a little less social when you do that, or don't do that, but it's really important that you be careful about what you share and what the people around you share. I call them the silly quizzes. People like to take quizzes on Facebook to find out what color their personality is or some other equally silly thing. But in doing so, they often end up answering questions that have been used as security questions in other places. For example, you might take a silly quiz and it asks you what the model of your first car was, or where you met your spouse, or where you went to grade school. A lot of times when you set up bank accounts or other confidential accounts, they will have you set up challenge questions that only you should know the answers to. Often those questions are exactly the same questions that you find in the silly quizzes on Facebook. And when you answer them on Facebook, you're giving that information to an unknown third party along with some of your profile information. And suddenly they're able to start painting a picture of you and what it would take to access your accounts. Even having said that everything you post is public, make sure you're using the proper privacy settings. Make sure that you've gone through the privacy settings of whatever social media accounts you're using, and you understand what they do, and you understand what they are set out to mean. The other thing that happens in this space is people share personal information about other people. And my favorite horrible example of this is when somebody has a new baby born into their family. They often will post a picture, the location, the parents' names, the date of birth, the time of birth, and the name of the baby. Oh, and usually also the gender. With that information, you can apply for a birth certificate, you can apply for credit, and no one will know until it's far too late. So think about what you're sharing about other people and have conversations with people in your lives about what they're sharing about you. Choose in your security and privacy settings whether or not you want people to be able to tag you or tag your photo. The photo recognition systems are amazingly good. If you drag and drop your own photo into Google Images, you'll probably find other pictures of yourself. And if you haven't set your Facebook settings correctly, Facebook is probably looking for pictures of you right now as we speak. If anyone has ever tagged you in a picture and it thinks it knows what you look like, it's looking for more of you. And practice strong security on your social media accounts. So they all have a lot of security built in. Most of them have, in fact, all of them have two-factor authentication built in now. Use those things. And then check on them regularly because things change. They add new options. They accidentally reset everything to default, and default is horrible. At least 3 different times I've logged into one of my social media accounts and discovered everything was set to default. I don't want that. I don't want default. I like to control my own destiny when it comes to social media. And I love social media, which you probably know if you follow me on any platform. But I'm also careful about what my privacy and security settings are set to. So again, don't share other people's personal information without permission. Dragging out your old college photos and finding that great one from spring break and then tagging everybody in it, it's a bad idea. Maybe not everyone wants to have that memory of spring break, nor do they want their friends and family to see them. So don't do it without permission. Don't friend people you don't know. This seems intuitive, and yet people friend strangers all of the time. And Facebook has a cap of 5,000 friends. I usually keep myself somewhere under 300. My general rule of thumb is if I have not shared food or drink with you, we're not going to be friends on Facebook. And I tell people that. They send me a friend request and I might know who they are, but if they haven't met the food and drink rule, I'm not friending them. But there's one of my friends has 4,000 friends on Facebook. And to me, that just screams that though she's a wonderful person, she's a huge security risk because there's no way she knows all of those people. Never friend somebody more than once. Usually that second account is a spoofed account. This happens a lot in government. When I worked for the city, I woke up one morning and I looked at Facebook because that's what everybody does first thing, and I had friend requests from the mayor. And I thought, that's odd. The mayor and I are already friends on Facebook. Someone had stolen her picture, mined her friends list somehow, and created a new account with her picture and all her information and refriended all of her friends. And a large number of people refriended that person. I didn't. I played along and had a whole conversation with them just to see if I could figure out what they were doing. In the meantime, public affairs was working to get it shut down because it was clearly an imposter. But if someone friends you and they're legit because they forgot their password, show them how to retrieve those things. I have a friend who somehow lost her password, and rather than trying to retrieve it or anything, she made a new account, and I refused to friend her. I said, no, you get one account. I'm not gonna guess, because eventually your old account's gonna get compromised and some stranger's gonna start using it, and I don't want to be part of that. Make sure that your posts are viewable by only your friends, unless you really want something to be public. Limit your posts and photo tagging, so limit who can tag you. Don't let yourself be tagged in stuff you don't want to be tagged in. And then remove location services, particularly on mobile devices. By default, if you're posting on social media, particularly Twitter, it's putting your location in there, and you don't really need to do that. And then finally, on social media, limit or remove third-party applications. This is how Cambridge Analytica happened. This is how lots of things happen. People allow third-party applications to access their profiles, and those third-party applications do things they're not supposed to, or they themselves are hacked. So go through your social media accounts, and unless you really want or need to use a third-party application, delete it. So mitigation, there's some things to do in mitigation that can really help you understand your threat level. So we'll look at some of them. Some of them are outside the scope of this, but we're going to look at monitoring and early reporting primarily. There's also training, insurance, backups, and redundancy. So this is just one of the monitoring sites that's out there, and on the next page I'll show you what it is. But this is showing you a list of breached accounts in real time, basically. So it increments all of the time, and it shows you the largest breaches and the breaches that have most recently been added. It's called Have I Been Pwned? This is actually the stars in there. This is one of my email addresses. So I put it in there, I click the button, and it's been found on 12 breach sites. And some of them are down there. So LinkedIn and Dropbox and Adobe and MySpace, yes, my old MySpace account, Kickstarter, Ancestry, all of those accounts were breached with that email address. And so that gives me the opportunity to go in and change those passwords. I actually subscribe to this, so it notifies me every single time one of my email addresses shows up in one of these breaches. and new breaches every single day. It's a good monitoring service for your personal email addresses and some of your work email addresses, just to know what might have been breached already. You need to focus on early reporting. You need to encourage people to report suspiciousness, whether it's emails, texts, phone calls, people in the building, doors propped open. They need to do something about that. And you need a policy that doesn't punish them for reporting when they have done something dumb. So when they clicked on the link that they shouldn't have clicked on, rather than bury it under the carpet and hope nobody notices, there needs to be an incentive for them to report it to IT or whoever it gets reported to before it becomes a bigger issue. And a lot of times people know they've clicked, they realize they shouldn't have clicked, and they just close it down and go home for the day and hope nothing bad happened. And we need to stop that. We need to get them to report it so that IT or IT security can take the precautions necessary to protect the rest of our systems. And that's a hard barrier because we typically ingrain in people, don't violate the rules or there's punishment, but we need to encourage them to report. You need policies and training. Just like everything else we do in emergency management, if we don't have a policy and we don't train to it, nobody's going to know what to do. So you need policies that are acceptable use. So what is an acceptable use of this technology, whatever it is? What are the guidelines for reporting? And what are our facility access policies? They need to be clear, they need to be enforced, and everybody needs to have ownership in enforcing them. Everybody needs to be free to say, hey, boss, I see you're not wearing your badge. You know our badge policy, wear your badge. And that can be a hard conversation to have, but it takes everybody to make this safer. And then every single person in your organization needs basic cybersecurity training. They need to understand the basic threats. They need to understand basic reporting. They need to understand phishing because they will almost certainly be subjected to a phishing or vishing attempt. And if they don't have any policy or training, they won't recognize it for what it is. So when we get to response, this is interesting for emergency management because our role is in consequence management. But do you have a plan? Do people know how to recognize an incident? They often do not. I got a call one day on my personal cell phone from the personal cell phone of a colleague in another agency. And I thought, that's odd, I should answer that. And that person had a strong suspicion that they were suffering a cyber attack, but nobody knew what to do. Nobody really understood if it was a cyber attack or not. And they didn't have a reporting mechanism for it. And it was, in fact, a cyber attack. It was CryptoLocker. It shut down a large number of their systems. They had to go to offsite backups and restore. It was never reported beyond their own organization. And it took them so long internally to identify it that they had a real issue in restoring. And because they didn't have policy and they didn't know what to do. So that speaks then to your recovery plan too. What is your plan beyond the technology? IT will tell you they got disaster recovery down, and they do for the stuff. However, when that stuff starts to impact people, we have to be able to account for that in the emergency management side of things. If the attack happened on the water system technology and now we don't have water, that becomes an emergency management issue immediately. So here's a sample incident annex. If you have your trusty cell phone with you and you scan that QR code, it's going to take you to the sample of the incident annex. And again, you'll be able to download all this at the end. But it is a major cyber incident annex, and it's up to you to define major. If you're a small organization, your major may look very different from a large organization. But it just walks through the pieces you need in that policy. It includes references, and all of this is in the policy. It includes the policy sets expectations. It requires you to put in situation and assumptions, just like any other annex, and a concept of operations. And this concept of operations is going to require a lot of discussion because you will get pushback on the responsibilities because you need emergency management, IT, and law enforcement for this. Because law enforcement will have access to things and information that nobody else does. So they've got to be part of this solution, and it may be a criminal matter. And it requires a lot of conversating to make it happen. There's a checklist in the plan that talks about pre-incident response and then recovery and demob and it even has ICS forms for you guys who are ICS purists. You can line it up with your ICS forms to make sure that you are covering what needs to be covered. So the common issues we see, most organizations don't have comprehensive policies that vest responsibility with every employee. And those that do have policies typically don't enforce them. Way more incidents occur than are ever reported in any formal way. Lack of response plans leads to slow recognition, response, and recovery. And lack of individual security leaves the entire organization at risk. Until people accept that they are responsible as individuals, this stuff will continue to happen. So that QR code will take you to the entire slide deck. And now I'm going to get through some questions really quick. Pascal, do you have some to ask? Or if you have questions, you can use the raise hand thing, you can use the chat thing, you can use the question thing. But if there are no questions, that's okay.
No, Sarah, this is Pascal. We just had someone post a kind of a side note about malware. And malware can also hide on diagnostic machines connected to networks.
Oh, yep. Malware can be anywhere. If you can digitize it, it can have malware on it, which is why it's important to have detection for it. All right. Well, if there's
on the side note for that.
Oh,
yeah. Home networks, separating your smart devices, like your smoke detectors, your thermostats, from other devices of your network is an important thing too.
Yeah, well, and I'd say that for commercial networks too. The day that your EOC thermostat gets in a fight with your drone is a bad day. So make sure that your IT people are separating these things out and that you understand, at least in general terms, how it all works. So I'll put in a little bit of a plug here for the Emerging Technology Caucus. It's open to anybody. If you are a nerd, if you want to be a nerd, if you're scared by nerds but just want to understand technology, the Emerging Technology Caucus is open to anybody who wants to join. It's on the IAEM website, and we'd love to have you. So with that, I have nothing else. So I'll give it back to Pascal or Chelsea, whoever's taking it.
Well, first of all, thank you, Sarah, for presenting and the opportunity for us to hear about the importance of cybersecurity. It's an important thing for us to consider, and I also appreciate the plug for IAETC, as well as the Digital Engagement Committee and the participation for everyone today. And I believe Chelsea has a little extra slide at the end, or not, about IAEM. I don't know if she's going to join on here in a second. But again, please, if you need to review the documentation, the webinar will be hosted on the website as a recording, as well as you can download the slides from Sarah, as she mentioned. And if you have any ideas for a future webinar series, please let us know. We'll be happy to take that information and reach out to those people. You can email those ideas to chelsea@iaem.com, and also go to iaem.com/webinars for both the recording as well as other upcoming activities and programs that are going to be scheduled. And we thank you again very much for all of your help in promoting preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery and emergency management and all the things that we do. Stay safe and have a great week and a great weekend.